Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us here at Sustainability Live Singapore. Now, time for our next fireside chat, and that's talent, sustainability and retention. That's a fireside chat with Stephen Keys, the Chief Talent and Sustainability Officer at IFS. Hi Stephen, welcome, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I always look at the agenda that I'm given for one of these, and I often pick out a particular session and think, you know what, I'm going to learn something from this one, because you don't always link certain aspects of business to sustainability, and linking retention and talent to sustainability, going to be honest with you, it isn't something that immediately jumps to mind as one of the first and most obvious links. So I am ready and willing to be shown otherwise, and how misguided I may be on this particular subject. So let's start with the context here, Stephen. That's a big build up for you, no pressure.
No pressure.
Talk me through it. What's IFS's approach to this? What is the link between the two, and what do you do differently to some other organisations?
Well, I think there is a link between sustainable practices and talent acquisition and retention, right? If I think about talent retention first, we observe a broad correlation between things like employee engagement scores. You can measure the degree of employee engagement through survey processes. So we see a link between employee engagement and ESG ratings generally. There's a correlation there. That's certainly true at IFS. We observe that employees here value their employees taking sustainability seriously. From a recruitment perspective, our experience is definitely that candidates are increasingly interested in our sustainability credentials as part of their evaluation process of us as a potential employer. That seems to be especially true of what we might term Gen Z, so some of the younger folks that are applying, people that are early in career. These candidates, we find, are not convinced by window dressing statements like, oh, we give X to charity. But they expect a coherent, well thought through process. They expect a sense that the organisation really is embracing sustainability as part of their broader strategy. And that's one of the things that I think attracts people to come and work for IFS. And look, there's lots of other benefits of sustainability, and I'm sure that many of the speakers today have touched on that, right? Becoming more resilient, mitigating risk, reputation enhancement, cost reduction. But retention and recruitment, definitely there's a role to play for sustainability.
One expression you used there about seeing through window dressing, I want to stick on that for a little bit, because as I often say at these events, I see more sustainability policies and strategies than is probably healthy. My bedtime reading, not the most, obviously the most exciting, but do you feel that should be integrated into the staff recruitment and retention, actually putting the two together to show how important it is to almost sell a business or organisation to the next generation of talent?
Yes, yeah, I think so. And you can only really do that. I mean, there's a phrase that we use at IFS, which is that for sustainability to truly be sustainable, it has to make economic sense. So I think the first step in the overall process is to make sure that whatever your sustainability programs, ambitions or intentions are, it has to be deeply and properly integrated and aligned with your core organizational strategy. Then you can start to leverage that as part of your talent acquisition and talent retention programs.
How do you find sustainable practices really impact talent acquisition and retention? Is there really that almost permanent marker link between the two? Can you see it in your metrics? Can you see it in your data? Because your job title, Chief Talent and Sustainability Officer, it suggests there is that inextricable link between the two.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely we do. So let's start there. Maybe we can then talk about some of the things that we found that have helped us to get there. So when we started building out our ESG programs, we also started asking our employees about their views and attitudes towards ESG. We figured that there's lots of different ways that you can measure progress, and one of them was employee sentiment. So we have an employee engagement survey that runs 3 times a year, specifically as part of a number. There's about 20 or so questions that we ask. One of them, on a 0 to 10 rating, we ask our employees to rate us on the following statements, right? Statement number 1, IFS acts on its responsibility to society and the environment. Number 2, I am satisfied with IFS's efforts to support diversity and and inclusion. That's very much a head question, okay? And then the third one is like a bit more of a heart question, which is people of all cultures and backgrounds are respected and valued here. We have observed a consistent improvement in those scores over time. We've also seen other metrics, so things like our voluntary attrition rates have remained at or below industry averages over that time. In fact, it's kind of reduced over that period of time. And I think one of the things that we've done particularly well through the employee engagement process, not just around sustainability and diversity, but perhaps more broadly, is making sure that our employees know that their voice is heard. We read every comment. We get some 17,000 plus comments every single survey. We read them, we respond, we act, and it matters. We also try to share some of the little stories that instill pride, like the little did you know snippets that represent, I don't know, talking points that people can share over a family dinner or when they've got friends over and they're talking about IFS and where they work. So, for example, the fact that we have photovoltaic glazing on the windows of our offices in Denmark, or the fact that we use our office kitchen in London once a month as a food kitchen to help local charities. The fact that we have the bigger strategy, our commitment to science-based target initiatives, the bigger picture actions undertaken, they matter, but it's often those smaller human scale stories that people can relate to and that engender real pride. Perhaps, going back to the earlier comment I made, in order to get there, your sustainability strategy has to be aligned to your organizational strategy, and it has to be executed in a proper and meaningful way. What I mean by that is, typically an organization starts, on a sustainability journey by building a small team of knowledgeable, experienced, talented leaders and individuals who are working on sustainability as a key strategic priority. The danger is if that stays in isolation, the organization is never really going to be able to embrace that commitment. The transformation towards the alignment of sustainability and strategy only really occurs or only really succeeds when leaders and individuals throughout the entire organization embrace sustainability as an inherent component of their day-to-day work and as an inherent component of their day-to-day decision-making. That means incorporating sustainability into business models, day-to-day business processes. At that point, you've got an organizational strategy, a sustainability strategy, and you have functional experts bringing their unique skills to bear, but with the addition of a sustainability mindset. So whether that's in procurement or finance or talent management and talent development, you've got that alignment. And of course, then our talent management teams and our talent development teams can kind of lean in and support that with targeted training, succession planning, evaluating skills gaps, promoting green practices in the workplace, integrating sustainability principles into HR policies, and so on. But that's when you really get that uplifting capability and alignment.
Now, Stephen, as you can imagine, whenever I'm listening to an answer from a guest, I'm always making mental notes of things I want to pick up from an answer. My mental notepad is now full. There are so many particular points I want to pick up from that answer. I'm going to try and remember them all. Businesses are often very, very good at communicating externally about their sustainability achievements. They have cut this by 3.7%, they're compliant on this. One thing you mentioned there about useful nuggets of information to go internally, so people can show it off, so people can be proud of it, so people can demonstrate why they enjoy working for a company because they do X, Y, Z. How invaluable do you find that is of actually intelligently communicating with the staff of practical examples? Because let's sit around the dinner table, you're not going to turn to your family and say, well, did you know we've cut our whatever rates by 3.8%? That would absolutely kill conversation stone dead. But if you give a great example, that's a talking point. Is that where you get the real value, do you find?
Yeah, 100%. You've got to find those stories that are at a human level and are quite engaging, and that way people feel, as I say, that you engender a sense of pride. You can install a degree of awareness, and you can also start to tackle some of the underlying issues that exist. Let's take diversity as a topic. one of the things that we've come across from time to time is that there's been some perceived conflict in folks' minds about meritocracy versus diversity. It's like, oh, we have these diversity commitments, but actually shouldn't we just be focused on meritocracy and the best person gets the job every time? Yes, 100%. I would argue that diversity practices and inclusion practices help enable meritocracy. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I see them as two sides of the same coin. And I think it's through sharing stories. I think it's through education and awareness that we start to build the capability and intent at every level of an organisation. I think it's also important that an organisation puts its money where its mouth is, so to speak, and lays out policies and commitments and goals that are helpful and appropriate. Personally, I'm not a big fan of affirmative action, right? Because I do think that runs the risk of undermining, meritocratic principles. But I am a big fan of saying when you've got a short list of candidates, you should make sure that at least 2 out of 5 of those candidates are, for example, female. Why? Because, well, if there's no females on the shortlist, you've got a problem. If there's one, it looks like an outlier. If there's 2, you start to normalise the presence of both women and men on a candidate shortlist, right? That helps to overcome or at least mitigate the risk of potential unconscious biases. So again, within that little kind of pocket, that little nugget of information, you can start to have all sorts of different conversations about what is unconscious bias, what are some of the other practices that you can undertake to mitigate the risk of unconscious bias in the recruitment process. And along the way, share little data points that we can start to track and measure success. I acknowledge that there are different parts of the organisation, some of whom really like having absolute and specific targets to aim for. And in that way, we can combine the best of both worlds.
Another point I wanted to pick up on the answer to your previous question was about surveys, because I'm sure there are plenty of people watching who have filled in a staff survey at some point, it has disappeared into the ether, and you're never sure what's happened to it. What you said was, we get the surveys, we read everyone, and we, very important word, act on it. What advice would you have for people and other organisations who are in good faith putting out staff surveys? They look at the data and go, oh, that's interesting. How do you connect that to acting? How do you guys go about doing that?
Okay, so that's a really an interesting question. I think first of all, it's really important to have the kind of platform that enables you to kind of slice and dice the data in meaningful ways, so that you can actually put the information in the hands of the manager who is responsible for that particular function or geography. I think at the same time, you need to work very hard to ensure confidentiality and anonymity. That's important, right? The other part of it is making sure that whilst we encourage people to fill it in, no one should be forcing anyone, to complete a survey process. Otherwise, you're going to undermine the results. You then have to give support and enablement to the managers. You can't just give them a kind of whole bunch of reports and say, right, go figure that out. You need to give them tools and processes and capabilities that enable them to interpret that data and to know how to act on it. So we provide little micro-learning courses. We're completely open and transparent about the scores. We share that openly with everyone. We benchmark regularly against other industry peers to see how we're going, and that appeals to different parts of the organisation as well that want to be able to compare. But comparing is only one thing. You have to kind of go, if there's a gap, why is there a gap? What can we learn from that? And that comes back to the fundamental mindset that all feedback is to be celebrated as an opportunity for learning. And if you don't have that concept of all feedback being celebrated as an opportunity for learning, as a core cultural attribute, you could run as many surveys as you want, but it's not going to make a blind bit of difference, right? So, I think it's about getting the cultural mindset right first, then introducing a set of tools that isn't just about the survey, but is about the follow-up and execution afterwards. And the final point I'd say there is, we do ask people to come up with action plans. So when we share the results, we take the time to run town halls at different levels of the organisation, get specific groups of people together. We share the results. We invite additional feedback as a result of the survey results. And then an ideal outcome is we work with that team on a set of actions together. The line manager is responsible for following through to make sure we get the results that we set out to achieve from those actions, but the responsibility is a shared one. This is about improving our business together. And I think that's what makes the difference in terms of driving improvement from one survey to the next each time we run it.
Interesting you mentioned culture there. That feeds in very, very well to a question we've had in from Jane. Thank you, Jane, for sending this in. And it's asking what, in your experience, are the one or two things to implement or to get right to really embed sustainability practices and mindsets into an organisation?
I would say that sustainability only truly becomes sustainable when leaders and individuals throughout the organisation embrace it as an inherent component of their day-to-day work and decision making. It's got to be a core part of core business models and processes, and you have to take the time, in my view, to educate and enable and encourage a conversation that says, okay, well, here's our company goals, here's the work, here's how you support that. What does your work mean from a sustainability perspective? So that starts with a bit of education and enablement. Like I say, we've chosen to partner with a third-party organisation, the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. They have helped us to embed sustainability skills into our workforce, particularly kind of key leaders in different functions and geographies throughout the organisation. We've also built a steer code, an ESG steer code, to help set goals, to measure progress, to provide support, advice and guidance where necessary. Of course, like any change management process, executive support is key. And we're very grateful. I think we're very fortunate here at IFS that our majority shareholder, EQT, is alive to the importance of sustainability and actively supports our work. I think the other thing I would say is that one thing you have to manage really carefully is the pace of change. If you push too hard, you run the risk of leaving people behind. The proposed changes that you're trying to make may become too avant-garde, and would-be supporters suddenly become antagonists. What works for us at IFS is taking small steps, little nudges, a sort of emergent strategy approach, and that way you bring folks on the journey with you so they feel they're part of the change rather than something that is happening to them. Make sense?
That does make sense, and that leads me on very nicely to my next question, so I'm not sure if you can see my notes from here. In a previous panel, we were talking about particular challenges according to locations. So the different challenges affecting companies in Asia compared to Europe, to North America, to Africa, and so forth. How important is it, particularly for companies that are multinational, which cover different regions, that they respect and understand different challenges in different regions to achieve these sort of objectives?
That's a really interesting question. I think, do I see huge differences and do I observe huge differences? No, I don't. Perhaps in terms of the, if I think about diversity and equity inclusion, then yeah, for sure. We operate in some 60 different countries around the world. There are different legislative agendas at play in those different countries around the world. We have to be mindful of that. I think as an organisation within our company context, we're very supportive of people, regardless of their background, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, whatever, right? And we work very hard to create that environment. But we also then have to be very sensitive to how that manifests itself in public declarations, right? So that we don't put employees at risk, and so that we are supporting them in an appropriate way. So I think it is important to understand, the market conditions in which you operate and adjust the way that you communicate your work in a way that is appropriate for those local markets. But internally, I think it's important to establish some kind of common universal cultural attributes. I was really proud when on one of our global town halls, our CEO stood up and we were talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, and he made it very clear that certain folks have certain opinions. They're not welcome to work here at this organisation. And I think I'm okay with that, right? Sometimes you do have to take a stand about what matters for you and your company.
And finally, we often talk about businesses being left behind if they don't engage properly in sustainability agendas. And I guess the link is, well, I've very rarely seen it made between staff retention and sustainability, as we were talking about at the top of this discussion. Do you feel that businesses could get left behind if they don't link the two, particularly when it comes to bringing in the next generation of talent?
Yeah, you talk about retention, which is interesting. So when folks talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the focus tends to be a lot on the recruitment side of the equation. Many folks think that overlook the flip side of that, which is retention. And let's just take one dynamic, right? Gender diversity. There's a well-known report that comes out each year from McKinsey, a consulting firm. And they talk about the broken rung. That means that for every 100 men that move from individual contributor roles into a management role, about 87 women get the same opportunity, right? So set pay gap issues to one side, you're just talking about fundamental opportunity. And okay, in any given year, 87 versus 100, it doesn't sound so bad. Compound that over 1, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and you start to see, a real pattern and a real problem emerging. So again, at IFS, we seek to address that through the development of future manager development programs. Again, we don't make it exclusive, we make it inclusive, but there is an equity of opportunity at play there. So we encourage 75% participation female, 25% male. And that's really about equipping the very capable women within our organisation with the skills and opportunities that they need to step up into people manager roles in the future. And then hopefully over time, that will start to tell in terms of internal promotion, and organisational development. I'd like to think that we're well beyond, having to have a conversation about why diversity matters. It clearly, having different perspectives, different points of view clearly drives better performance. It clearly drives better outcomes. And fundamentally, it just makes it a much more pleasant place to work. Here at IFS, we're about 36% of our total workforce is female, about 32% of managers. And whilst there's a long way to go, we've made huge strides on both those numbers over the past 5 years, and it just makes it a more rewarding and enjoyable place to work.
Absolutely. And one of my old HR managers once told me that any manager can recruit, a great manager can retain, and that's something I want to stick with. Stephen,
100%.
Stephen, thanks ever so much for your time today. We could talk all afternoon, but I'm afraid we do have to move on to the next networking break. And my experience of running these events is if you cut into a networking break too much, you do tend to annoy your delegates. So we'll move on. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciated it.
Appreciate your questions as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.